There's a specific kind of person who wins every argument they've never actually had. In the shower, in the car, walking the dog at 11 at night. They deliver the perfect line. The one that finally makes the other person understand. The one that ends the conflict before it starts. Except the conflict never starts. It only happens here, in the private theater of their own mind, over and over with an audience of one. Or maybe it's not the shower. Maybe it's the drive home from a family dinner where nothing actually went wrong, replaying a comment that could have meant something, deciding what it meant, deciding how to respond to what it meant, building an entire relationship crisis out of a sentence that has already been forgotten by the person who said it. And here's the strange part. The person on the other end of that imagined conversation usually has no idea any of this is happening. They're not preparing for battle. They're just living their life. Meanwhile, somewhere else, an entire war is being fought over something they said, might say, or could one day say. A war with strategy, casualties, and a clear winner, decided entirely in someone else's head. Curious, isn't it? That so much emotional energy can be spent on a fight with no opponent in the room. But here's what's important. This isn't a personality quirk you can laugh off. It's a pattern with real architecture behind it. And once you understand what it's actually doing, you start noticing it, in yourself, in people close to you, everywhere. It costs something, too, even though it looks like nothing is happening at all. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just a mind quietly working overtime, spending hours of attention and energy on conflicts that exist nowhere except behind someone's eyes. Energy that never goes toward the actual relationship, the actual conversation, the actual person standing right there, unaware they've already been through a war. Because there isn't just one version of this. There are at least three, and they don't look alike at all. The first type replays the past. They're not imagining a future fight. They're refighting an old one, except this time they win. The comment that landed wrong at dinner 4 months ago. The message that still sits unanswered in some private courtroom of the mind. They didn't say what they wished they'd said in the moment, so they say it now, later, alone on a loop. And here's the thing, this isn't simple grudge holding. Aaron Beck, the psychiatrist who founded cognitive therapy, described a set of automatic thinking patterns he called cognitive distortions, mental shortcuts the mind takes under stress that feel like reasoning but actually distort it. One of them functions like a kind of fortune-telling, predicting how an exchange will go and reacting to that prediction as if it had already happened. The rehearser runs a version of this backward. They relive an old exchange, as though replaying it enough times might finally rewrite the outcome. It never does. But the mind doesn't seem to register that. Every replay feels briefly like control, like finally getting the last word. Except the argument stays exactly where it was, unfinished, unresolved, and now rehearsed so many times it feels more real than the actual memory it came from. And little by little, something else happens without the rehearser noticing. The version of the other person living inside their head, the one who never listens, who always deflects, who has to be defeated with the perfect sentence, starts replacing the actual, complicated, occasionally reasonable human being in front of them. The next real conversation isn't really with that person anymore. It's with the character the mind built out of them, during all those solo performances in the car, and the shower, and the quiet moments before sleep. And that's the paradox. The rehearsal is trying to bring peace. It almost never delivers it. Instead, it just moves the argument further out of reach, one imagined victory at a time. Something brought you to this video. And I guess it wasn't random. People who find their way here are usually people who have been looking, not for advice, but for someone to finally describe what they've been feeling without being able to name it. If that's you, everything I've put together about this pattern is linked in the description and in the first pinned comment. Now flip it. There's a second type of person, and this one doesn't look backward. They look forward, into conversations that haven't happened yet and may never happen at all. They rehearse the confrontation with the coworker who hasn't actually done anything yet. They draft, mentally, the exact words they'll use if their partner brings up that topic, a topic that hasn't come up in weeks. They walk into rooms already braced, already armed with a script for an ambush that isn't coming. They read a short text message twice, then 3 times, scanning it for a tone that isn't there, preparing a defense for an accusation nobody made. By the time they actually see the person again, they've already survived 4 different versions of the conversation, and none of them happened. Researcher Jos Broschot at Utrecht University spent years studying this exact mechanism under what he named the perseverative cognition hypothesis. His research suggests that worry functions as a kind of mental simulation of threat, and that the body responds to that simulation in ways that resemble how it responds to a real one. Heart rate, muscle tension, the entire physiological posture of conflict activated by a conversation that is, so far, entirely imaginary. That makes sense once you sit with it, because the nervous system doesn't have a reliable way of telling the difference between a threat that's happening and a threat that's being rehearsed in vivid detail. It just responds to the simulation, again and again, sometimes for hours before anyone says a single real word. And here's what's uncomfortable about this. The preemptive defender often believes they're protecting themselves, preparing, getting ahead of it. But the body doesn't experience getting ahead of it as safety. It experiences it as danger, repeated, without end, a battle fought so many times in rehearsal that the nervous system barely has room left to notice when the real, much smaller thing actually happens. It's not caution, it's a body stuck in a permanent state of readiness for a war it might be the only side actually fighting. And that readiness comes at a cost most people never connect to its actual cause. The tight chest before a phone call, the exhaustion after a conversation that went perfectly fine, the sense of being tired in a way that a full night's sleep never quite fixes. But then there are the other people. The ones who don't rehearse loudly, who don't seem to be fighting anyone at all. And this third group is probably the most interesting one because their war doesn't look like a war. It looks like silence. Because some people don't rehearse the confrontation. They replace it entirely. They never say the thing. They never bring up the hurt, the request, the disagreement. Instead, they run the entire imagined argument privately, start to finish, complete with the other person's imagined excuses, imagined defensiveness, imagined refusal to understand. And by the end of it, they've relationally had the fight. They know exactly how it would go. They've decided, without ever opening their mouth, that it isn't worth having. Picture the friend who has been quietly hurt for months by something small, being left out of a plan, a joke that landed wrong, a favor that was never returned. They never bring it up. Instead, they've run the conversation in their heads so many times that they already know the friendship will survive it badly, that the other person will get defensive, that it isn't worth the discomfort. So the friendship doesn't end in an argument. It ends in a slow, unexplained fade, and the other person spends months wondering what happened, with no idea that an entire trial already took place and a verdict was already reached without them. And here's where many stories quietly diverge, without anyone noticing, because the fight that never happened out loud still changes something. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema, whose research at Yale shaped much of what is now understood about rumination, described how dwelling repeatedly on a distressing situation, without ever acting on it, tends to deepen distress rather than resolve it. Her work on what she called response styles found that people who process difficulty by going over it again and again in their heads, instead of engaging with it directly, often end up feeling worse, not clearer. And there's something else, something you feel but can't always explain. The person who imagines the fight enough times starts treating the real relationship as if the fight already happened. They pull back a little. They get quieter around that person. They stop extending the benefit of the doubt they used to extend freely. And the other person, who has no idea any of this occurred, just experiences it as distance. As someone growing cold for no visible reason. That's the hidden cost. The battle that never happened out loud still leaves something behind. It just happens in one direction only. But here's the nuance that complicates all of this. And it matters. This same instinct, simulating conflict before it happens, isn't always dysfunction. Some of it is simply preparation. People who grew up in unpredictable environments, where conflict actually did arrive without warning, often develop this rehearsal reflex as a form of protection that, at the time, made complete sense. Scanning ahead, building scripts, staying ready. It's not weakness. It's a nervous system that learned, early and accurately, that being caught off guard used to cost something real. The difference isn't whether someone rehearses conflict. Almost everyone does, occasionally. The difference is whether the rehearsal ever ends, whether it's a tool that gets put down once the moment passes, or a stage that never goes dark, running the same production every night to an audience that already knows how it ends. And here's something else worth sitting with. The people who do this most convincingly are rarely the ones who look anxious from the outside. They're often the ones everyone describes as calm, composed, good in a crisis. Because by the time an actual disagreement arrives, they've already survived it a dozen times in private, so the real version barely registers as difficult at all. Which means the people around them almost never find out how much was happening underneath, simply because it never showed. Most people don't change because someone convinced them to. They change because something happened that made the old way impossible to ignore. If you're watching this video, I think you might already be at that point. And if you are, I've put together everything I know about what comes next. Link in the description and in the first pinned comment. Now I need to ask you something directly. Think about the last argument you rehearsed, not the one you had, the one you built in your head, word for word, before or after it mattered. Who was it with? And what were you actually trying to protect underneath the script? Because most of the time, it isn't the last word people are after. It's safety. It's the feeling of not being blindsided again by someone who once mattered enough to hurt you. Notice which type showed up first when you asked yourself that. Maybe you're the one still replaying a conversation from years ago, polishing your response to someone who has probably forgotten the whole exchange. Maybe you're the one who walks into ordinary rooms already braced for a disagreement nobody else is having. Or maybe you're the quiet one, the one who has already decided, privately, how 3 or 4 of your closest relationships would go if you ever said the real thing out loud, and has chosen, again and again, not to find out. That doesn't make you dramatic. It doesn't make you unstable, or difficult, or too much. Whatever word got attached to you the first time someone noticed you doing this. It makes you someone whose mind learned, at some point, that readiness felt safer than trust. And maybe that's really what separates people who eventually put the script down from the people who keep performing it for years. It isn't willpower. It's the slow, quiet realization that most of the people they were rehearsing against were never actually coming for them in the first place. You don't owe anyone a war they didn't start. And you're allowed to close the theater, even if the show has been running for a long time. Not by pretending the old hurt never happened, but by finally letting the real, current, imperfect person replace the character your mind built to protect you from them. Maybe that's the quiet work underneath all of this. Not silencing the mind that rehearses. Just learning, slowly, which battles are actually yours to fight and which ones only exist because some earlier version of you needed them to in order to feel safe enough to keep going. If any part of this described something you've never said out loud, I'd actually like to know. Tell me in the comments which one you recognized. The one who replays, the one who braces, or the one who goes quiet instead of speaking. There's something in naming it that starts to loosen its grip. And if this is the kind of thing you want to keep understanding about yourself, stay around. There's more coming about the quieter patterns almost nobody talks about, the ones running underneath everyday behavior, waiting to be named. Because somewhere, right now, someone is winning an argument that will never take place. And the real one, the one that actually matters, is still just sitting there, waiting for them to finally show up for it.